Introduction to Blood and Fire and Total War. www.zhaozuiyuan.com. The empire is on the verge of decline, with heavy taxes and land consolidation oppressing the people of every empire. Famine and peasant uprisings are everywhere, and at dances, the colorful lights, wine, and drunken aristocrats form a sharp contrast. At the same time, outside the borders of the empire, countless alien races have turned their gaze towards it. https://www.zhaozuiyuan.com. Chapter 1. Knights who are actually Transcendents. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, Royal Knight Karl Joseph Franz, for your fearlessness and bravery in suppressing peasant uprisings, and for your courage and wisdom, the Empire now grants you the title of Lord of Holland Baron. Brave Royal Knight, you have proven with your courage and loyalty that you deserve this honor. May your sword always be sharp, your shield always be indestructible, and may your loyalty to the Empire never change. A short and white-haired Imperial general walked up to Karl Franz and, after speaking very seriously, awarded him a workmanship. A very exquisite medal and a document wrapped in silk, which serves as proof of Karl Franz as a baron. Recalling the scene of the day of the honorific ceremony, the young knight Karl Franz walking on the road still feels as if he is living in a dream, with an incredible feeling about everything he has experienced. His real name is not actually Karl Franz, but after crossing over, he naturally inherited this person's identity. He also had no interest in appearing out of place with the rest of the world, and naturally accepted the new identity of this world without hesitation. He felt extremely unfortunate that the background of this world was still similar to that of the medieval period in Europe, somewhat similar to the backgrounds of the Lord of the Rings and the medieval Warhammer world. The living conditions in all aspects were terrible and difficult to accept, and the harsh feudal system made ordinary people in this world feel like they were living in hell, with almost no dignity or rights. In the past, Franz had not yet felt how bad the Middle Ages were, but when he truly came to this world, he truly understood what the Middle Ages were. There are no beautiful castles or buildings in our imagination, and noble ladies and young masters who dress elegantly, speak and behave elegantly, and are also polite do not exist. After all, there are many gentlemanly aristocratic etiquette that we know of. In fact, it was only after the Renaissance and even the Industrial Revolution, with the development of productivity and the popularization of education. In this era, there are only dirty and messy buildings like sheds, as well as dirty streets everywhere. It is impossible to see nobles dressed in bright clothes on the streets on weekdays. After all, nobles never walk to the places where these lowly people are located. Nobles live in their own and beautiful aristocratic areas, and they do not even have any contact with ordinary lowly people who live in cesspools. Moreover, none of the aristocrats with gentlemanly demeanor in his imagination existed. When Karl Franz came to this world, he only saw a group of ugly-faced slave owners. He once heard firsthand of a noblewoman who ordered the family guards to cut open the face of her maid because she disliked her being more beautiful than herself. The aristocratic young master, who is a playboy, is jealous of others and even orders their servants to engage in a life-and-death duel on the street to attract attention. However, what is even more terrifying is that the other elderly nobles did not show much anger or unsightly expression after hearing these news. They just smiled and gently shook their heads as if they had heard some interesting rumors, saying, "These young people are becoming more and more restless now, and it seems that their level of tutoring is not very good. If it were me, perhaps I should go and hire a better etiquette teacher for my children, and then exile this incompetent etiquette teacher to the border." This kind of ugly face really made Karl Franz feel nauseous. He had already understood that in the eyes of these nobles, it seemed that ordinary people who were not nobles were simply not the same kind of creature as themselves, just like how humans treat their own dogs or livestock. Those well-treated servants are just dogs that are good at wagging their tails and being favored by their owners, while those who are not well-treated are bad dogs that are not pleasing to people. However, whether a good dog or a bad dog, they are just a dog. Even if their owners dress them up beautifully and dress them up, they are still just a dog. However, what made Karl Franz extremely lucky was that he himself was not one of these ordinary civilians, otherwise he would find it hard to imagine how disgusting it was to kneel on the ground all day and lick those noble boots. But he was not particularly lucky either. He did not become a true nobleman, and could only be considered as stepping into the threshold of nobility with one foot, because his identity was an ordinary royal knight in the Rhine Empire court, who was one of the guards responsible for guarding the palace gate all day. The identity of this royal knight is hereditary, but it sounds nice, but in reality, there is no real aristocratic power. One benefit is that after seeing a nobleman, there is no need to kneel down, just bow, because the royal knight represents the face of the royal family, which cannot be trampled on by others. However, the royal knights did not have their own fiefdoms or fiefs, and they only had a hereditary knightly title. For generations, the family had to serve as guards for the emperor to stand guard at the entrance of the palace and receive a fixed monthly salary. Even the specialized armor and equipment on the royal knights do not belong to themselves, but are standardized equipment issued by the royal family. So Franz said that he had only barely stepped into the threshold of the nobility with half a foot, because he was vastly different from those ordinary commoners and did not need to bow down in front of the nobility. But I don't have many rights that belong to the nobility, I don't have my own fiefdom and people under my rule, and I don't have my own industry. In other words, I'm just a senior guard exclusively for the emperor. When Franz first traveled here, he was also a bit depressed when he learned all of this, because according to the novels he had read online before, other travelers would often have their own territory after crossing, so that they could cultivate and develop their own fields, and then gradually become lords as their strength grew stronger. But I am just a guard standing guard, even if this guard is the emperor's guard and holds the title of a royal knight, it is just an ordinary royal guard. Can it be that after crossing over, one can only stand guard for others all day and become a lifelong gatekeeper? However, Franz only served as a guard for a week before ending his career as a gatekeeper. This does not mean that he was expelled by the emperor, but in a sense, it is also similar. Because one day while standing guard, he saw one of his companions getting drunk and secretly sexually assaulting a palace maid behind the bushes. Looking at the person's lewd face and the maid's defiant and angry expression, Franz immediately shouted to stop him. That guy might have been drinking too much, but when he saw Franz daring to stop him, he rushed over and got into a fight with Franz. But now that Franz has become a serious knight who has undergone rigorous training for 800 years, he is not even capable of beating a drunkard. Therefore, this guy was severely beaten by Franz and can be said to have been humiliated and thrown into his grandmother's house. After such a fight, Franz's trouble came because this guy had a fundamental difference from Franz, the hereditary royal knight. He was the youngest son of a court earl, but because that court earl couldn't directly give him any rewards and didn't want his youngest son to cause trouble outside all day, he arranged a position as a royal knight for his youngest son. As a result, he beat up the youngest son of the court earl himself, but he was directly hated by others. Although when the guards escorted Franz and handed him over to the deputy commander of the royal knights for handling, Franz had a serious expression on his face and loudly argued, stating that he did not hit him out of personal grievances, but to maintain the dignity of the royal knights. Therefore, he not only did not receive punishment, but also received a commendation from the deputy commander. But Franz knew that he had actually offended someone, and the praise he received now was just an ambush for future trouble. Coincidentally, due to severe land consolidation and aristocratic corruption in the empire, large-scale peasant uprisings have erupted in many regions. Therefore, the court count proposed in the court that some young royal knights could go to the army for training. This can not only prevent these royal knights from being superficial, but also help the imperial army urgently replenish the very scarce grassroots officers. The emperor also felt that this guy had some truth to say. After all, he didn't need to have so many guards around him all day. Therefore, Franz and several other equally unpopular royal knights were sent to some provincial armies of the empire to serve as grassroots cavalry officers, and then went to suppress peasant uprisings. This sounds quite good. Young royal knights can go to the grassroots to experience it. If they can make military achievements on the battlefield, they will naturally be granted a title according to the laws of the empire, and can also get rid of the awkward status of a gatekeeper, the royal knight. But you should know that no matter which world you go to war in, you will always die, especially those imperial provincial troops who lack military funds all year round. Although they are not completely rotten, they have also become quite rotten. In addition, there are many peasant uprising soldiers, and it is like using eggs to strike stones to resist them with such troops. So after Franz finally became his cavalry officer, he had to face an embarrassing situation on the battlefield where he had a total of 1,000 troops on his side, but had to confront the 20,000 peasant uprising army on his own. Even if the equipment of those peasant uprisings is diverse and disorderly, and they are not even regular armies, is that not something that our 1,000 provincial soldiers can resist under normal circumstances? However, Franz, who had read the Romance of the Three Kingdoms before, had a more agile mind. When the armies on both sides were facing off against each other relying on fortresses, Franz found the commander of his own army overnight and suggested to him that he could lead a cavalry team to launch a night attack on the enemy. Looking for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, because Franz knows that a large number of people does not necessarily mean that the army can fight, especially these peasant uprisings are carried out because they are too hungry to bear. Most of them are actually hungry people, so these peasant uprisings are definitely suffering from night blindness, and they cannot see clearly at night. They also do not have such military literacy and know to arrange sentries at night to prevent enemy attacks. To Franz's delight, the military commander he was in was also a young aristocrat who wanted to make a difference. He didn't want to rely on the fortress and just keep going like this. When he heard Franz's hopeful method of breaking through, he naturally made a decision for him to implement it. So that night, Franz personally led a total of several cavalry, who carried torches and fire tongs with them and ordered them to wrap their horses' hooves with cloth when they set off, quietly approaching the huge camp of the peasant uprising. Then they set fire directly while creating various rumors through shouting, such as shouting, "The general has escaped, our leader has fled," or "Run quickly, the Imperial Emperor's reinforcements have arrived, the royal knights have come." With such cunning and despicable tactics that a group of honest old farmers had never seen before, coupled with the loud enough voices of these cavalry and the chaotic situation within their peasant uprising army, Franz managed to plunge the uprising army into serious chaos. Especially when they saw Franz's shining royal knight armor, they immediately believed Franz's rumor that the royal knights had already been killed. Then, this 1,000-man provincial soldier saw that the enemy had been trapped in a bombing camp and would take advantage of this opportunity to kill each other overnight. As a result, they defeated this 20,000-strong peasant uprising in one fell swoop. Chapter 2. Franz's Golden Finger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, so the court earl who was beaten by Franz's youngest son couldn't sit still. He clearly wanted to take this opportunity to arrange for Franz to die directly on the battlefield. Therefore, he chose a battlefield with a very significant difference in military strength between the two sides, and the commander on this battlefield was also a young aristocrat with little combat experience. According to the script designed by the court earl himself, Franz should have died directly on the battlefield. Unexpectedly, not only did Franz not die, but he also led the army to a complete victory on the battlefield, especially since the commander of the provincial corps was another son who had never paid the Earl of the Palace, which made him even more annoyed. So this victorious army entered the capital with the news of a complete victory. With a terrifying record of defeating 20,000 enemy soldiers with a force of 1,000, the emperor was even more shocked. As a result, officers at all levels of this army were promoted and made a fortune. The commander of this army went directly from being the son of the original count to a brand new viscount. The glory of a double count not only made the court count smile, but also made Franz's arch-rival hate his teeth. Even Franz himself has a baron title, and he is the kind of baron who owns a fiefdom. Originally, according to the emperor's plan, he was planning to directly appoint his young and promising royal knight as a baron to a manor outside the capital. Although the estates outside did not have much fiefdom, the territory near the capital was already very prosperous and close to the political center of the empire. It can be said that if given such rewards by the emperor, Franz could directly become a rising political star within the empire in a day. However, if Franz could ultimately receive such favorable treatment, the face of the court count who opposed Franz would be swept to the ground, so this guy did not hesitate to offer slander to the emperor. This count is a wise man who knows that he must not ruin the emperor's interest when he is happy, so he must not speak ill of Franz at such times. Otherwise, he will not only appear to be a bad person, but also make the emperor feel that he does not give him face. So this archenemy of Franz suggested to the emperor, saying that this battle had already demonstrated Franz's excellent commanding talent. If Franz were left in the big dye vat of the imperial capital, it would only waste his excellent talent. This count suggested that the emperor should directly enfer Franz to the western border of the empire, where he could fight against the wild beasts outside. During this period, the barbarian tribes on the empire's border became increasingly active, and there was a possibility of forming a barbarian army to invade the empire's borders at any time, so that was where military talents like Franz were most needed. The emperor of this empire is not a decisive monarch himself. He is known for his soft-eared ears, and anyone who speaks seems to have reason. So he followed the count's advice and waved his hand to transfer Franz's fiefdom to the border town of Holland in the western province of Aragon, allowing Franz to become Holland's lord there. The court count, who had his youngest son beaten by Franz, was now quite happy. Aragon, the western province of the empire, was notorious for its poverty, with barren land and mountains and rocks everywhere. Don't be fooled by Franz becoming the lord of a town, but the annual tax revenue of that town may not be as much as 1/10 of the income from manors outside the imperial capital, and there are also occasional barbarian tribes outside the border invading there. And most importantly, that place is far from the political center of the empire, and the nobles there basically have no chance to enter the imperial capital for a lifetime, let alone walk back to the court. So if Franz's fiefdom is restricted there, it can be said that it basically cuts off Franz's future, and he can only cling to the barren mountains and guard a little insignificant tax revenue. He will never be able to return to the political center of the empire for a lifetime, and even his status as a royal knight is inferior. Although royal knights do not have the power of a lord, they can at least enjoy the prosperity of the imperial capital, and as imperial guards, they themselves have a certain political influence. Although individual royal knights may not have much influence, a combination of royal knights can also have a significant impact. So Franz crossed over, and within a month, he transformed into a baron, and then had to run to the border to take office. After all, according to the noble laws established at the beginning of the empire's founding, these feudal lords within the empire are not allowed to leave their fiefdoms casually, especially those on the border who must be stationed in their territory for years. Their task is to defend the empire's borders. So if there is no order from the emperor or other nobles, if these nobles leave their territory casually, they will be directly treated as deserters for more than 2 weeks. Not only will they need to be deprived of their own titles, but they may even lose their heads in the most severe period of the situation. So for any normal person, running to such a place to become a lord is no different from being exiled, which is to say, to guard the borders of the empire. However, Franz is not a normal person because he has a secret that he has not told anyone, which is that as a traveler, he himself possesses the golden fingers that a traveler usually possesses. The golden finger on Franz's body is a computer strategic game that was once very popular on Earth. Warhammer Total War. With this game as the foundation, as long as he can overcome the most difficult development stage in the early stage, wouldn't it be easy for him to directly develop critical weapons in the future? Moreover, for Franz, a traveler with a wealth of knowledge in his mind, if he were to be placed in the manors around the royal capital, his own farming would be easily missed by others and his development would not be easy. But in such border areas where my grandmother doesn't care and my uncle doesn't love, I actually have the ability to showcase my skills for development, and then the opportunity for my successful rise will come. The reason why he didn't use this golden finger to help himself before was because he didn't have the conditions to use it before. Because Franz himself was a hereditary royal knight of the Rhine Empire, and his ethnicity was also the Rhine people of Miao-Zengenhong, his influence was directly determined as the power of the Sigma Empire in Warhammer world. However, although Franz had already established his own factions and camps, he lacked the most basic start-up funds. Even if he wanted to recruit troops, he did not have enough funds to do so. The cheapest type of army in the Empire is the spearman, but the problem is that the recruitment price for a team leader of spearmen also requires a full 325 system coins. Franz used to be a royal knight, earning an annual salary of 50 gold coins. Because his predecessor had not been a royal knight for several years, and he also had various expenses in his daily life, Franz only had a total of 60 gold coins on hand at that time. Just a little money is not enough to cover your expenses, so even if you want to recruit a team of the cheapest troops, you cannot recruit them. And by the way, what's the use of recruiting troops when Elaine is in the Imperial capital or suppressing peasant uprisings? It is impossible for the Imperial capital to allow a royal knight or other small nobles to have their own private weapons, and even the homes of those top nobles cannot have more than 100 guards. They can recruit a team of 120 long spearmen who are completely loyal to them all at once. Do they want to rebel? As for the dilemma faced by the 1,000 Imperial armies on the battlefield, it is not something that can be easily solved by recruiting over 100 spearmen. Even if a military is recruited, it is not very meaningful. So Franz has not yet enabled his own system. However, Franz has now left the Imperial capital and is walking on the path of receiving his own territory. When there is no one to manage him, he can naturally use this golden finger system. Especially since the reward he received was not just a worthless border baron, but also a starting fund of 1,000 gold coins bestowed upon him by the emperor. In addition, when Franz led his cavalry to attack the peasant uprising camp at night, he discovered a large amount of gold, silver, and jewelry that these guys had harvested after breaking through the noble mansion in a warehouse. Looking for the book garden www.zhaoshuyuan.com, he naturally wouldn't pretend to be aloof and polite to a group of peasant uprisings like bandits at that time. Thinking of this, Franz patted the 2 large bags on his horse's back and a delicate small box in his arms, which contained all his belongings. There were a total of 1,800 gold coins in the 2 large bags. In fact, the spoils of war that Franz seized from the battlefield were far more than these 800 gold coins. However, because many things were not easily monetized artworks, Franz had to exchange these bottles, jars, and various gold and silver items for the standard gold coins of the empire in the pawn shop in order to quickly obtain funds. In addition, the small box in Franz's arms was the most valuable treasure he carefully selected, filled with various beautiful gemstones and treasures such as pearls and amber, which also had enormous value. I don't know why, maybe because Franz knew he had offended someone. He always felt like he was alone and didn't even have a servant, and walking on the road seemed a bit unsafe. Especially as I reached the western province of Aragon in the Empire, the more impoverished and secluded the road, the more difficult it became for me to become. It was quite normal for me to come up with a roadblock and rob along the way. Therefore, Franz decided to take advantage of the fact that he had just left the Imperial capital and had not yet traveled far, and had not encountered any danger along the way, to quickly obtain a group of soldiers from his own system to protect himself. Otherwise, if he only thought of his golden finger when he encountered danger, it would be too late. To be on the safe side, Franz officially activated the system interface in his mind for the first time, preparing to provide himself with a more reliable army as a guard to protect himself before officially arriving at the fiefdom. Chapter 3. Official launch of Golden Finger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, ding. Your newbie benefits have not been claimed yet. Just as he opened the system in his mind, the young knight Karl Franz saw such a prompt box. He checked and found that he could even have a beginner's gift package, which felt like a trick from some domestic online games. However, what is given for free is often the most fragrant, and Franz first opened his own beginner gift package to see what good things he had obtained. Ding! You have a chance to randomly summon an Imperial faction lord. Ding! It has been detected that you are highly compatible with the legendary lord of the Imperial faction, Emperor Karl Franz. Now, we will directly integrate the legendary Lord Karl Franz character card with you in a limited way, and you will gain all the strength and knowledge that the character possesses. Sleeping Trough, Golden Hammer wielding big guy. Just as Franz was still busy exclaiming, he suddenly felt an energy-emitting dazzling golden light fall directly into his body in an instant. Then, Franz felt as if his body was full of power, and a lot of knowledge came to his mind. There are many aspects to this knowledge, including governing the country, marching and fighting, various court intrigues, aristocratic etiquette, and some miscellaneous studies that Franz considers chaotic. It has to be said that Karl Franz, the Elector of Rick, is still a very knowledgeable person. Just the pile of various aristocratic etiquette and foreign languages is enough to make Franz, a scumbag, scratch his head. After the golden light had completely disappeared, Franz found that his body seemed to be filled with some explosive power, and he didn't know when his attire had also transformed into a classic look of the Kaiser. He even held the artifact Galmaraz Warhammer in his hand. If it weren't for Franz's own height of less than 1.8 meters and his true Kaiser's height exceeding 1.9 meters, Franz would even have thought he had truly become a Kaiser. However, Franz now feels a bit worried. How can he put away his incredibly shiny outfit? You should know that in the Rhine Empire, clothes and other similar items cannot be worn casually. Different positions have corresponding specifications, and the higher up, the more strict they become. For example, the dazzling armor and various golden patterns and decorations on one's body, as well as the colorful feather helmet on top of one's head, are not something that an ordinary baron can possess. If one is caught wearing these clothes, they may be directly convicted of plotting rebellion. But just as Franz thought about this issue and was eager to get rid of his entire outfit, he was suddenly surprised to find that his armor and various attire had disappeared, replaced by an extraordinary set of sky blue Rhine Empire standard baron dresses that he had been awarded at the ceremony. This breathed a sigh of relief for Franz. It turned out that this transformation could be switched freely according to his own thoughts, so that he wouldn't accidentally wear a khaki outfit and become unable to take it off. After completing a one-click dress-up, Franz began to quietly experience the power within his body. After a simple estimation, Franz suspected that his current strength had still reached the level of legendary experts in the Rhine Empire's power division. The Rhine Empire divided the instances of these warriors into 5 different levels in order to distinguish the differences in strength between them, namely beginner, intermediate, advanced, top, and legendary. A junior warrior is basically an ordinary soldier who has received formal training, an intermediate warrior is roughly equivalent to the level of a third-rate general in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and a senior warrior is at the level of a first-class general like Zhang Liao or Su Huang. A top-level warrior is similar to the overlord Xiang Yu, who can achieve the level of killing 100 people without any specific conditions on the battlefield. As for a legendary warrior, he is a top-level warrior who can kill an army with just one person and achieve one-person formation. However, the strength of these warriors has not been exaggerated to a certain extent, and they basically remain at the stage of mortals, which means that if a person is killed, they will die. Even a legendary warrior who is accidentally stabbed in the heart by a junior miscellaneous soldier will be killed without any accidents. So although Franz was extremely excited about his current strength, he didn't think he was invincible in the world. If there were hundreds of royal knights running out to surround him, Franz really didn't think he could successfully kill these hundreds of royal knights. In Franz's impression, most Uyghurs actually do not have any special strength. Perhaps some nobles can rely on resources and potions to accumulate their strength to the level of intermediate or even advanced warriors, but that's basically it. It is not as described in some novels that each noble is a powerful warrior, as if their titles are all divided according to their own combat power. Before the combat effectiveness reaches a certain level, an individual's military strength cannot affect politics, so their titles cannot be directly divided based on combat effectiveness. Moreover, for most nobles, having sufficient physical strength themselves does not have much significance. Because nobles can completely hire those experts as their own guards, there is no need to personally go to battle and kill people. The higher the level of nobles, the less necessary it is to develop their personal strength to be particularly strong. After all, even if one exercises their strength to the limit, which can extend their life by about 10 or 20 years, this is still due to the effect of physical health, and cannot make people immortal. Once upon a time, a very wise emperor of the Rhine Empire once said that as an emperor of the Rhine Empire, the least necessary thing is personal force. When facing assassination, they have their own trusted guards to protect themselves, and when facing enemies, they also have a trustworthy royal knight's order. If an emperor's guards cannot stop the assassins who come to assassinate him, it proves that the emperor is foolish enough to not even care about his own safety. If an emperor's royal knights and countless armies cannot stop the invading enemies, then even if the emperor can fight, there is no room for reversal. For such a statement, Franz felt that what he said was particularly reasonable. As an emperor, the most important ability was the means of governing the country, not how capable he was of fighting. Otherwise, what would those forbidden soldiers and guards do? A country is not just a sect or a mafia. The leaders of this country need the ability to govern and balance various domestic forces, rather than the ability to fight on their own. But even so, Franz is still very satisfied with his ability to possess the power of the Kaiser, after all, who doesn't want his combat power to be stronger? And now Franz is just a bare rod commander, not to mention the guard. He doesn't even have a guard on hand, so it's better to have some personal force to protect himself. Opening the system, Franz first directly charged the 1,800 gold coins in his hand. After all, gold coins can be earned again, but one's own army is an urgent and hard demand. And to Franz's great surprise, his system not only allows for recharging with Imperial coins, but also all valuable items such as gold, silver, and other types of precious metals, gemstones, and pearls can be recharged according to the system's description. The system will convert these items into coins based on reasonable prices in the market. Seeing this, Franz couldn't help but look down at the small box on his chest, hesitating whether to take it to top up. But in the end, he refused this tempting choice because he felt that he still needed some private money. If he had to recharge everything, what would he do if he needed to spend money? You can't just let your own army rob, can you? After completing the Krypton, Franz began to choose his own guard for himself. First of all, Franz can be certain of one thing, which is that the guards around him must be elite but not in large numbers. After all, he is just a baron who wants to go to his own territory and take office. So when leading their own guard through various levels and other noble territories along the way, if they only bring dozens or hundreds of people, they should still be able to allow themselves to pass with them. However, if they suddenly bring thousands or even more people, they may be treated as a new rebel army. After all, besides the emperor going out, whose noble guard can have so many people. But Franz felt that it wouldn't be appropriate to just get himself a knightly unit. After all, if he had another unit, he could still say that he had spent money to hire outside, but he had a complete knightly unit. How could Franz explain when a newly appointed guard like him cultivated such a knightly unit? After all, mercenaries can have various types of troops within the territory of enemy countries, but it is absolutely impossible to have knights, just like mercenaries in modern warfare cannot have main battle tanks and fighter jets. So Franz realized that it was not easy to choose a more reasonable guard for himself. Fortunately, his system not only unlocked the conventional branches of all Warhammer Empire factions, but even those battle-specific branches could be recruited. Therefore, after selecting some, Franz spent 700 gold coins to recruit a team of overseas soldiers for himself. This group of overseas children's army is a 60-person pistol cavalry unit. Although equipped with firearms, they can only be considered light cavalry, so being mercenaries is actually quite reasonable. As for the issue of gunpowder weapons, because no one within the Empire has ever developed gunpowder, people will not even know what the short firearms in these cavalry hands are. At that time, people will only think that they are just ordinary light cavalry. As a baron, having 60 light cavalry as guards is also a very reasonable thing. If it is not maintained for a long time, most barons have the conditions to get themselves such a team of guards to show off outside. Chapter 4. Inside and Outside the Imperial Capital. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. When Franz spent 700 gold coins and chose to summon this expedition army from the system, a dazzling white light appeared in front of him in the blink of an eye. Then, as the white light dissipated, 60 cavalry soldiers stood in place. These cavalry rode high-headed horses in a reddish-brown color, wearing only a breastplate and lined with clothing reminiscent of the European soldier style of the Renaissance period. The overall color tone was red and white, and they wore a classic Imperial pistol cavalry bird-headed helmet on their heads, but the feathers on the helmet turned blue. On the surface, the equipment of these cavalry can only be considered the level of light cavalry. They have 2 oversized flint pistols in their hands, and in addition, they also have a handle and a half-sword hanging on their waist. This is all the configuration of these foreign expedition soldiers. If the proud knights within the Rhine Empire were to see such a cavalry team, they would surely mock it, because according to their traditional theory, such a cavalry team does not have much combat power. This cavalry team is not equipped with long weapons suitable for charging and fighting on horseback, nor is it equipped with heavy swords suitable for chopping on horseback, nor even a shield that can protect the cavalry itself. There is only one long sword that looks more like it is for infantry use, and 2 unknown but very short weapons that seem to have little power at first glance. For these knights, it is really difficult to imagine how to exert their combat power. However, what these knights do not know is that the Expeditionary Children's Army actually belongs to the category of cavalry archers. In a sense, cavalry archers can almost be said to be the nemesis of all inflexible heavy armored knights. Because it is difficult to catch up with these agile light cavalry at the speed of heavy armored knights, but these agile light cavalry can use their ability to ride and shoot on horseback to fly kites for heavy cavalry, constantly shooting at them while consuming their energy. Franz is not quite sure about the attack power of his foreign army. After all, in the game, both pistol cavalry and foreign army have a problem of low armor breaking ability, making it difficult to deal with heavily armored enemies. In reality, even this type of shotgun has a powerful armor-piercing ability. Although Franz cannot guarantee the power of this short handgun, based on his experience as a knight, the power of this short handgun should surpass that of ordinary crossbows at close range. This is also confusing, but Franz decided not to judge these soldiers based on the experience in the game. At most, the various data in the game can serve as a reference. After all, I am not living in the game, but in reality, so it is impossible to bring a set of data-driven things from the game into reality for complete comparison, only as some kind of reference. So Franz thinks that the armor-piercing ability of these pistol cavalry should still be good. Although they may not be as good as the serious 800 musketeers, their armor-piercing ability at close range should still be very strong, right? This is a comparison he made based on the power of the firearms and cavalry weapons from his impression of the gunpowder era. Although he is not sure how much difference there is between gunpowder in Warhammer World and gunpowder in reality, he thinks that with so much black technology in the Empire, how can the gunpowder in the Empire be weaker than black gunpowder in reality? With such an additional team of cavalry, Franz immediately felt a strong sense of security. Although it cannot be said that this pair of cavalry can guarantee direct invincibility, at least he doesn't need to worry about facing some small characters such as thieves. And it was only after Franz obtained this team of overseas soldiers that he realized that the soldiers he summoned through the system did not require maintenance costs. According to the system, the maintenance costs of the soldiers would be paid by the system itself, which means their salaries were actually paid by the system and did not require Franz to pay out of his pocket. The only thing Franz needs to pay for is the food and accommodation of these soldiers on a daily basis. After all, they can't afford to drink from the West, can they? Knowing that he didn't need to spend maintenance expenses, Franz was still very happy. Otherwise, when he had more troops in the future, he would have to deduct a large amount of money from his own hands every once in a while, and he really couldn't afford it. Especially when these 60 cavalry appeared in front of him, Franz's first thought was how he could afford to support these 60 cavalry. Although they still have to take care of their own meals and accommodation, not paying them a salary can be considered as saving a lot of money, which is also something worth celebrating. However, Franz felt a slight sense of regret again. It was a pity that he had recruited the army of the Empire, not the army of the Count of Vampires. Otherwise, those living and dead people would not need to eat anything. Although I say I don't need to pay them wages, the food consumption of these cavalry is still very high. After all, every warhorse is a king of stomachs. Moreover, warhorses are relatively delicate animals that only require careful care from humans, unlike cows and sheep, which can be easily managed with just a little bit of grass. So don't look at people always using cows and horses to describe those laborers. In fact, at least in this era, it is very likely that a horse eats better than humans. Those hardworking and easy-to-feed old cows are the real laborers. Looking for an opportunity, Franz ordered a soldier from an expedition to shoot a large tree in the distance with a pistol in his hand. After shooting, Franz walked over to look at the scars on the tree and confirmed that these were cavalry handguns. Although their power was not as fierce as he had imagined, they were definitely not related to the word low armor-piercing ability. At least according to Franz's estimation, if they were to attack the plate armor of heavy knights, they might not be able to penetrate it, but attacking the lock armor on ordinary soldiers is still not a problem. After all, not all soldiers are heavy units that can arm themselves like iron cans, and most soldiers don't even have a set of lock armor. In Franz's impression, the current level of technology in the Empire should not have reached the level of the Renaissance, roughly in the Middle and Late Middle Ages. Although plate armor was born during this period, it still remained in the stage of plate chain armor, which is the combination of plate armor and chain armor. Moreover, these plate armor were not directly forged by people using windmills or water wheels combined with hydraulic presses in the future. They all require excellent craftsmen and specialized mage apprentices to stabilize the metal and ultimately forge it. Therefore, the cost of plate armor these days is still very high, but it is far from the level of a complete set of plate armor in the Renaissance, which is only equivalent to half a year's salary of an ordinary blacksmith. So these cavalry are actually sufficient on the battlefield, because there are not so many soldiers equipped with heavy plate armor. At least in Franz's impression, apart from the Royal Knights of the Rhine Empire and several other large knights, he has never heard of any military organization that can equip everyone with plate armor. After testing the power of these cavalry, Franz's mood suddenly improved a lot, not as restless as before. However, walking on the road with these cavalry, Franz's mood gradually became bad again, because he suddenly realized that the scenery outside the imperial capital and inside the imperial capital were simply two worlds, and the difference was truly frightening. Franz thought that although the internal environment of the imperial capital looked a bit dirty and messy, overall it was still very prosperous, at least it seemed no worse than Aldolf in Warhammer World. But it was only when Franz arrived outside the imperial capital that he realized what stage the current empire had reached. To put it bluntly, Franz felt that the empire was already quite formidable before it was destroyed. Franz walked outside with this group of cavalry for a whole day, and as he moved further away from the imperial capital, he realized that he had seen more and more refugees along the way. Each of these refugees was starving and emaciated, looking no different from the lifeless zombies in Warhammer World vampires. If it weren't for their basic rational existence and shining eyes, Franz might have really regarded them as lifeless vampires. Although it may not be considered as a place full of starving people along the way, people who starve to death can also be seen from time to time, and people selling children and women can be seen everywhere. And what shocked Franz immensely was that these people didn't even think about selling children or women for much money. If it were placed in the imperial capital, it would take at least 20 gold coins to buy the cheapest made for oneself. However, if it were placed here, the price of a pretty little girl would only require a small bag of coarse grains. Even for those 1 or 2-year-old babies who haven't grown up yet, they can be replaced with just 2 pancakes. You should know that 1 gold coin can buy hundreds of pounds of flour, and if it were to be made into a pancake, it could be made into at least 1,000 yuan. It was truly shocking that a child was worth so little money. At the beginning of his journey, Franz wanted to lend a helping hand to these starving people, but soon he gave up the idea because he and his cavalry did not carry a lot of dry food, and even giving them all was just a drop in the bucket. Moreover, these starving refugees may seem reasonable on the surface, but in reality, they have already gone hungry. Franz originally wanted the cavalry to share some food, but when the cavalry just took out the dry food they carried with them, these guys rushed towards Franz without killing themselves. He was so scared that he quickly ordered his pistol cavalry to retreat and not entangle with these guys. Otherwise, if he were dragged down by these starving common people, Franz had no doubt that even a fully armed team of Rhine Royal Knights would be torn apart by them here. Chapter 5. Empires Towards the End. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, no wonder the empire is now filled with various peasant uprisings. If it were me who had no way to survive, I would definitely choose to rebel too. Riding on a tall horse, Franz looked at the scene in front of him and felt his heart filled with excitement, unsure of what he should say. The land annexation within the empire has become increasingly severe. The founding emperor of the empire once strictly limited the amount of land that these nobles could own within the empire. Any nobles with an excess of land would be fined a huge amount, and may even be convicted of trespassing and deprived of their titles. But with the gradual decline of imperial power within the empire and the development of aristocratic power, this law has long been forgotten by people, and almost no one can remember it, or people deliberately forget it. Moreover, with policies in place and countermeasures in place, these nobles can always find ways to exploit legal loopholes. For example, the Rhine Empire once restricted a baron's ownership of land to a maximum of 6,000 acres. This baron could then not list a lot of land under his own name, but instead rely on his servants and some obedient family members. Although theoretically, servants cannot own their own private property, because their registered residence is attached to the master, which is equivalent to a slave attached to the master. In fact, many servants also have their own private property. After all, even the most humble maid in your family's mansion knows how to save some private money for herself. Therefore, in reality, these servants have their own private property and no one specifically investigates them, otherwise it will appear that the nobles treat their servants too harshly and lose their noble status. Therefore, in reality, many nobles may not have much land on the surface. At least if you cross the land deed, you will find that their land does not exceed the scope of legal planning. However, in reality, the land they truly own has already exceeded their normal ownership by more than 10 times. As for how these lands actually came about, it is quite normal to snatch them from the hands of farmers. Almost every time there is a disaster, these nobles will open warehouses to release grain while asking these farmers to draw IOUs from their own hands. These farmers also do not understand the procedures for borrowing loans, and even do not know the words, and then unknowingly owe them high-interest loans. When it comes to the autumn harvest, these farmers will find themselves unable to pay off their debts, and the kind-hearted nobles will express their willingness to purchase land from their hands at a high price to offset their debts. After taking the land from their hands, they will continue to stay on the ground to cultivate as their tenant farmers. These farmers feel that they also have to pay taxes anyway, and it seems that there is no difference in this way, so they can only be forced to hand over their land. Then they will find that the rent on their land becomes more and more, and all kinds of taxes and rents make them unable to lift their heads. At least 70% or even more of the annual harvest must be paid in. Their lives are actually no different from those of serfs, and in a sense, they cannot compare to the lives of serfs. Although serfs do not have freedom, they are like the livestock of noble lords. In order to prevent losses, noble lords also need to feed these serfs on a daily basis. If there is a bountiful harvest, the noble lords will naturally harvest all the grain and leave only a small amount of food for them. However, if there is a bad year or even a famine, in order to prevent their serfs from starving and stabilize them, the noble lords still need to open warehouses and release grain for them. But these hired tenant farmers are different. When they catch the harvest, they may be able to leave more food for themselves, but the extra food they leave is basically in their own stomachs, making it impossible for them to become wealthy. However, in times of disaster or famine, they can only survive on their own. After all, they are not the private property of aristocratic masters, and there is no need for them to care about their lives. According to Franz's understanding, the empire had actually abolished serfdom about 50 years ago. At that time, the empire was still boasting about it, and even now it is showing off to other countries around it, claiming to be a beacon of human rights. But in reality, the serfs who were expelled still had nothing, and they did not have their own land and property. They could only choose to continue farming for the former aristocratic grandparents. Moreover, the former aristocratic masters also had to bear some responsibility for their serfs, but now it has transformed into a complete employment relationship, which means that in reality, aristocratic masters do not need to be responsible to them at certain special critical moments. After all, you are not willing to farm for me, and some old farmers are willing to farm for me. Well, how does this damn world feel similar to the late Ming dynasty? As Franz delved deeper into this terrifying world, he also felt increasingly familiar with it. How similar is the scene at this moment to that of the late Ming dynasty? The aristocratic power, like the Donglin party in the past, not only controlled the government, but also seized a large amount of land resources, causing farmers to have no land to cultivate. At the same time, the emperor of the empire was not a reliable character, or in other words, the emperor's education never cared about the lower-class people. Almost every emperor in an empire is a skilled strategist. They know how to stir up relationships between nobles and seek a stable balance among different factions of the aristocracy. However, they have never studied how to develop people's livelihoods or how to seek benefits for their own people. After all, the commoners and nobles are like two different creatures. Which noble master would spend all his time studying how to become a servant of the people? Since last year, the empire has entered an unprecedented drought, with decreasing precipitation and leading to widespread crop failures. Because these nobles only focused on their immediate interests, they never considered building public works. No nobles were willing to pay for facilities such as reservoirs or deep water wells, and ordinary civilians could not have the money to build them. So in the face of this drought, they have no choice but to watch their crops go without a harvest, and at the same time, they have to bear the heavy taxes of the nobility, as well as the rent of the noble masters. You should know that noble lords never care about whether you have encountered major disasters or droughts when collecting rent. If they see that you cannot hand in the grain, they will only say that you must have secretly sold their grain, beaten you up, and then forced you to continue to hand in the grain. But don't these aristocratic masters know that these farmers can't even sell their food? You know, almost all grain shops are in their hands. Don't they know if anyone goes to the grain shop to sell grain? Moreover, grain shops do not purchase grain casually. Basically, they start with 1,000 pounds at a time, and whose ordinary farmer can take out 1,000 pounds of grain at once. These things were all learned by Franz from some refugees who were in a better state along the way. Although these refugees didn't have much insight, they still had no problem expressing their own experiences. Franz knew immediately what was going on with them, as he had seen many similar cases before when studying history. History itself is a cycle, and it may not always return to you, just as some philosophers once said. What has already happened will happen again, what has already been done must be done again. In the past, Franz had never really cared about this issue. After all, he had almost never left the bustling world of the imperial capital before, and no matter how bad the outside world was, it could not be as bad as his own as a royal knight. Compared to these ordinary civilians, although the royal knight may not be considered a remarkable identity, when compared to them, it is like a heaven and a earth, just like two different creatures, truly confirming that the gap between people is even greater than that between people and dogs. When Franz stayed in the imperial capital, he had heard of the outside world, but all of that was news that had undergone countless embellishments and concealments. For example, when an old farmer in a Jazz territory rebelled, everyone just treated it as a joke to mock that Jazz. Even Franz had similar thoughts at the time, and they never realized that such a simple sentence could mean that thousands of people might end up with their heads down, indicating that at least tens of thousands of people behind them were about to starve to death. There is also a legend that somewhere in the empire, a disaster broke out. The emperor waved his hand and directly allocated 10,000 gold coins as relief funds. Then, a large group of nobles went to flatter and praise the emperor, expressing how wise, divine, and benevolent the emperor was. However, Franz now thought to himself, can one of these 10,000 gold coins eventually fall into the pockets of these poor people? When he was sent to suppress the peasant uprising, he didn't see such a tragedy on the way, because he was a royal knight with a royal warrant. Although he said that he was just not good at working in the court, he was put outside to talk to the ground beetle nobles. He was also a royal knight with an official status. So he can walk directly to a dedicated post station all the way, without the need to stay in the wilderness, and even in many places, some local nobles will come to flatter him, hoping to get some important news from him. At that time, Franz didn't realize that the interior of the empire was rotten to such a level, and even because of the singing and dancing scenes created by various nobles, he didn't realize that there was anything wrong with these nobles except that they were a little bit ground beetle and a little arrogant. Why don't they treat ordinary people as people? Seeing the miserable situation outside, for some reason, Franz's heart suddenly seemed to ignite a fire. When he first arrived in this world, he only set himself a goal of becoming a human being, just wanting to enjoy the so-called noble life. After all, he was just an ordinary ox and horse in his past life. Can't he still enjoy himself in this world? But now his goal is no longer to pursue personal enjoyment, even if it stems from his previous education or his attachment to the beautiful society he once lived in. He doesn't want this country to become like this. But Franz knew that the current empire had already rotted from the roots to the bones, and all of this ultimately stemmed from the empire's completely decayed aristocratic politics, as well as the greed and recklessness of its large landlord class. So the only way to change all of this is to overthrow the empire, overthrow all the existing political systems of the empire. Only in this way can we revitalize this already decayed empire and prevent the farmers and people here from living so tragically as they are now. Chapter 6. Hidden Killers on the Road. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Franz made up his mind, but all of this was meaningless. He couldn't overthrow the empire's rule with just 60 cavalry on his hands. So far, all of this has been just his delusion. After completely stepping out of the direct jurisdiction of the imperial capital, Franz saw a scene that became increasingly desolate. Although the farmland and estates belonging to the nobility looked lush and did not show any signs of poor harvest, there were still a large number of refugees wandering around outside. Some refugees wanted to go to the aristocratic farms to beg, but were immediately driven out by the guards inside without hesitation. According to Franz's understanding, the guards in this type of farm were not truly cultivated by the nobility, they were basically just some farmers who had received the most basic training. These soldiers only have a uniform that looks like something in a spear, not even a shield and armor. If they were put on the battlefield, they would be safe cannon fodder players, but if they were put here, they could still dominate the refugees outside, without any concern. Perhaps a few months ago, they and the refugees outside were actually the most ordinary group of farmers. As we walked, the road gradually became deserted. Although the population within the empire was dense, there were not many refugees everywhere. If there were such a large population, with the empire's current state of continuous decline, it would probably have been completely destroyed long ago. However, Franz felt something was wrong because they were gradually walking down a path in the woods. For some reason, Franz always felt that the surrounding environment seemed too quiet, right? Stop it. Franz couldn't help but reach out his hand and wave towards the cavalry behind him. I feel like something's wrong here. Let's have a small team of cavalry scout ahead and explore the way. The expressions of the foreign expedition soldiers behind Franz also became serious. Although they did not have the keen hearing and vision of Franz, who suddenly became much stronger, or the dangerous intuition ability that Franz possessed as a legendary warrior, they also noticed that there seemed to be something wrong in this forest with their own combat experience. The 5 cavalry looked at each other and nodded, then placed their hands on the pistols at their waist and rode their warhorses slowly towards the road ahead. Franz felt something was wrong, partly because his intuition was vaguely reminding him, and partly because Franz thought of the court count he had offended. Although he is actually in a state of exile to some extent, no matter what, his goal for himself has not been fully achieved. After all, Franz was originally just a hereditary royal knight who may have lived a life of mediocrity in the position of gatekeeper. However, even if Franz had to stay away from the power center of the empire and had to become a baron in a remote area, he still achieved a fundamental improvement in social status. Don't be fooled by the fact that such a border baron doesn't seem to be very valuable, with a low income, and can only be his local tycoon all day in the mountains and valleys, but he is also a real feudal aristocrat. If the current royal knights of the empire were to make a choice, it is believed that at least half of them would be willing to become powerful and influential feudal nobles in remote areas outside. The reason why the remaining half are unwilling to leave the imperial capital is because they have some powerful relatives or other relationships in the capital, which can naturally give them a better future and allow them to enjoy happiness in the capital rather than just being idle gatekeepers. Therefore, even if the Count of the Court had foiled his plan this time, he had actually benefited Franz, let alone the Emperor giving Franz a large and generous reward. These rewards were enough to save him some money and make him a happy landowner. And no matter what, Franz's ability to wield great power on the battlefield can be considered as making the Emperor remember such a young knight. If in the future the Emperor needed a reliable commander to fight, and suddenly remembered this kid again, wouldn't it leave him with the possibility of achieving great success for no reason? For the principle of eradicating the root cause, no matter where it is, Franz knew it. He put it in his shoes and thought that if he were the Earl and his youngest son was beaten or even disfigured by an ordinary knight with no status, then his revenge would not have been to only operate for half a day and just send him to the border to become a baron. Otherwise, such revenge would have been too easy. Moreover, Franz had heard that the court count was not a good person, clearly a cunning minister. If Franz had retaliated on his own, he could have secretly arranged a group of people to rob and kill him, a poor and powerless baron, halfway through Franz's appointment. Dead people have no future, as long as Franz dies, then things naturally come to an end. So Franz now suspects very much that he may encounter something unsettling on his way. Previously, he summoned this cavalry because he suddenly thought of this possibility. Unfortunately, I don't have any units at my disposal that are particularly good at conducting reconnaissance. Otherwise, I wouldn't have thought of sending out some cavalry to test the situation bit by bit. Especially the grass and trees next to this road are very dense, making it seem very suitable for ambush, and it is also inconvenient for cavalry to directly enter. After all, the size of cavalry is too large and inflexible. In fact, as Franz had anticipated, there was now a group of ill-intentioned people hiding in this patch of grass. These people are wearing some seemingly worn-out armor and clothes, and the weapons they are holding also look quite worn-out. But don't underestimate these worn-out weapons. As long as they're not particularly rusty, these weapons not only won't affect their sharpness, but they may also add an additional buff that can cause tetanus. It's as effective as being enchanted. The people hiding in these bushes were looking nervously at the cavalry who suddenly stopped in the distance. They were a bit worried. Did one of them accidentally be discovered? Damn it, Lawrence's old ghost is deceiving me. That knight doesn't seem to be completely unaware and even knows how to hire a cavalry from somewhere. The person hiding in the grass whispering is the leader of these people. They are a group of more disciplined bandits in the vicinity, although they don't have any specific or loud names. They are also a well-known bad group around here. The reason why they are more disciplined is not that they do not like robbing the rich and helping the poor on behalf of heaven, but that they are very clear about what kind of people should rob, how should they rob, and what kind of people should not rob. For those poor people who have little or no oil, it depends on the situation. If slave traders have recently contacted them, they will naturally take away these poor people and even the few possessions they carry. If the people passing by are some caravans, they often only charge a toll and then release these people, usually not directly robbing the caravan. After all, caravans are different from poor people. Caravans often have backgrounds, but poor people do not have backgrounds. These caravans are basically maintained by their respective noble families, both openly and secretly. Therefore, if you owe them money and rob them, you dare to cut off the wealth of these noble lords. Just wait for their revenge. But if you only charge a reasonable toll and maintain the safety of others on your territory, then the other party often won't be too thorough about you. After all, noble lords need to spend money to send out troops to trouble you, and they also need to spend a lot of money. So as long as you don't make them feel that blocking their profits and making them think it's more cost-effective to kill you, then the attitude of these noble lords towards you is more of just turning a blind eye and treating them as not knowing. As for the fact that if there is a powerful aristocratic convoy passing by on their territory, they will definitely choose to hide far away and have no intention of taking action, fearing that they will accidentally provoke these aristocratic masters and make them furious, resulting in their own destruction. Moreover, sometimes they also take over some private tasks from noble lords, such as occasionally targeting past caravans of hostile families, helping these noble lords deal with less difficult political enemies, or helping them deal with escaped tenant farmers, which is what they often do. It is precisely because they are more rule-abiding compared to their peers in other fields that they can become bigger and stronger, and become a small hegemon in this place. Not long ago, a man named Lawrence claimed to be the butler of a court earl and quietly arrived here with several family knights. He placed an order with them to take down a newly appointed baron who might pass through this path. If it were under normal circumstances, they would never dare to take action to kill nobles, because these nobles not only have soldiers on hand, but also often have relatives and connections. Even if you kill this nobleman today and handle the head and tail well, other nobles will also come to this area with soldiers to wander around, or even come directly to trouble you. For these aristocrats who have always acted with a domineering style, they are not the judges who like to talk about evidence. Whenever they suspect you in any way, they will immediately launch a thunderous attack on you. But the housekeeper Lawrence handed him a very inconspicuous badge, indicating that if he came to the door with this badge in the future, he could obtain the friendship of the count's family behind them. In addition, there was a total reward of 300 gold coins. Although these robbers were not particularly interested in the friendship and bounty offered by the so-called aristocratic masters, the butler generously brought 100 gold coins as a deposit, which made these greedy robbers unable to resist and took the order directly. They didn't just take on the order without any thought and wanted to rob and kill a baron nobleman. They even specifically inquired from Lawrence and found out that the baron was just a new nobleman, and there were no other nobles in the family. Originally, he was just a royal knight with no power to show the emperor the door. And according to what they said, the baron also left alone when he rushed to his fiefdom to take office. Therefore, they should not have the power to deal with this baron. Even if the opponent is a royal knight, they will not have too strong combat power. After all, royal knights can at most pick 10. They are a gang of robbers with over 100 people, and they cannot bear to rush to any knight. But now, when they see the 60 well-dressed cavalry that this baron is carrying, they immediately feel that they have been deceived. This baron is not as harmless as the legend suggests. Even if the other party obtained a mercenary from some channels, it also indicates that the other party knows how to arm and protect themselves. Chapter 7. The Powerful Pistol. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, boss, why don't we do it? Although the subordinates next to the bandit leader didn't speak, he quickly understood what his subordinates wanted to express through a unique set of communication gestures they had developed themselves. He is also a bit conflicted about this issue. If he does it, let alone offend the nobles. Just these 60 cavalry soldiers are not easy to deal with. Although Franz ordered all of his cavalry to wear a cloak outside, making it impossible for others to notice that these seemingly light cavalry soldiers were actually equipped with breastplates, for these bandits, even the 60 most ordinary light cavalry were not so easy to deal with, and one could suffer heavy losses if not handled properly. These bandits are not the heroes of Liangshan in the water margin, nor do they have the idea of doing justice for the heavens. They are just a group of villains who bully the weak and fear the hard. So they don't even want to fight against these armed enemies on a daily basis. They just want to get rich, not fight hard with others. Unfortunately, they are now in a difficult situation and have already received the money. If they don't handle the affairs of the Count, they will definitely provoke him. And these people are lurking here like this. If the cavalry in front hasn't noticed, they may still be able to sneak away, but once discovered, a fierce battle cannot be avoided. After all, they can't say that more than 100 fully armed people here are all squatting here, right? For these reasons, the bandit leader hesitated for a moment before finally gritting his teeth and gesturing for his subordinates to take action directly. Got it. Anyway, these people are ambushing here. Although the enemy may have noticed something, in such a dense forest, the cavalry is unable to charge and appears very clumsy. So there is still a high possibility that they can take down all the cavalry in front of them with a sudden attack in such terrain. If they were to fight against 60 cavalry in the plain terrain, not to mention the people they are carrying now, even if they are twice as many, they would not dare to fight. As the bandit leader suddenly blew a whistle, more than 20 hideous criminals suddenly emerged from the bushes on both sides of the road. Although they had a premonition earlier, they suddenly saw an ambush on the side of the road, and both Karl Franz and the other foreign expedition soldiers were startled. The more than 20 criminals who stood up all held a fierce crossbow in their hands and without hesitation, shot arrows at the 5 cavalry soldiers walking at the front. The crossbow has strong penetration and is particularly easy to get started with. It only takes 1 or 2 months of training to master this weapon proficiently, far exceeding the 1 or 2 years required for archer training. Thanks to the fact that the Rhine Empire has not yet developed the steel-armed crossbows of the late Middle Ages, the penetration power of these crossbows has not yet reached an abnormal level. For example, those steel-armed crossbows can even penetrate the plate armor of a full set of armored knights at close range. Even these wooden crossbows have tremendous power, and the 5 soldiers responsible for exploring the way in front of them immediately collapsed. Although 2 cavalry soldiers survived due to wearing breastplates, 3 cavalry soldiers were directly shot dead by stray arrows. Shooting the cavalry responsible for exploring the way in front, a larger number of bandits suddenly emerged from the surrounding bushes. These people's appearance and attire indicate that they are robbers and mountain bandits blocking the way. They are wearing leather armor or animal skins, and occasionally some can wear a relatively old set of lock armor, which does not have any particularly good defense. The weapons used are also diverse. But these bandits were clearly prepared in advance, and the first ones to charge out were mostly spearmen, who charged directly towards the cavalry still standing on the road with spears. Enemy attack me, take them down. It wasn't until then that Franz understood what it meant to meet on a narrow path where the brave would win. If placed on other terrains, he could have ordered his cavalry to run away quickly. However, in such a situation where there was only a narrow path, it was impossible for all of his cavalry to run away, as the surrounding dense forest was not suitable for cavalry to enter. So now Franz's only choice is to command his cavalry to attack quickly. As long as they successfully defeat these enemies, he will be safe. It's just right. I want to see how a group of light cavalry charge at my spearmen. The bandit leader couldn't help but burst out laughing when he heard Franz's words just now. Although the battle was somewhat unexpected, the arrangements he prepared in advance were not a problem. He directly instructed his subordinates to prepare a large number of spears to block the way, so that even if these cavalry wanted to charge over and create a bloody path, they would need to directly attack the formation of his spearmen. If it were heavy cavalry, it may still be possible to directly cut a bloodline among the spearmen, but with only a few lightly armored cavalry, how could they force themselves onto the pile of spears? But in the blink of an eye, the bandit leader realized that he was too happy. He realized that after hearing the command, these light cavalry soldiers did not directly draw their swords and charge forward as he had imagined. Instead, they suddenly took out two strange weapons from their waist that he had never seen before. I don't know what those cavalry soldiers did, so I pointed at my own soldiers with these two weapons. Suddenly, there was a crackling sound, and a burst of smoke and flames came from the air. Then, my subordinates fell like cutting leeks, and with a splash, a large area fell. Although this terrain limits the proudest mobility of the children's army, the narrow terrain also enhances their firepower. Each of the soldiers had two cavalry short guns in their hands, and at close range, over 100 firearms were fired at them. The bandits who had just rushed out were instantly overwhelmed by a barrage of bullets. These pistols used by the cavalry in Warhammer World are not the pistols we remember used in gun battles in movies and TV shows, but rather a type of handgun with rough workmanship and a silly and thick appearance. There is no way. At this time, there was no seamless steel pipe production technology, so if the barrel of a handgun was made thin, it was easy to cause these firearms to explode directly. Therefore, nowadays, the caliber of handguns and the bullets inside are particularly large. If we follow people's habits for the caliber of firearms, the handguns used by cavalry must be at least 20 mm caliber handguns. So when such a large bullet hits a person, it's not just a blood hole. If it hits a person's chest, it can directly create a bull-sized blood hole. If it hits a person's head, it can even shatter it like a watermelon. So just in the blink of an eye, these rushing robbers were shot in disarray by a round of pistol cavalry, and their deaths looked quite tragic, as if they had been hammered to death by a heavy hammer or a large hoe. Oh my, no good, the enemy has witchcraft. Seeing the damage caused by these pistol cavalry, all the robbers were scared and sweated profusely. They really can't understand how these people did it, just pointing at them with a strange-shaped tube can make them look miserable. And those who had never seen gunpowder immediately thought of the legendary witchcraft. Perhaps only those evil wizards could achieve such terrifying killing effects, able to kill invisibly like now. These bandits were immediately frightened, and the long spearmen who rushed out died in an instant. The remaining crossbowmen and swordsmen stood still, unsure of what to do. Even their leader stared wide-eyed, unsure of what to say. After all, this was a bit beyond their expectations. It was as if one day you saw someone killing someone with a flying sword, completely breaking through his values. The fact that the bandits were frightened did not mean that the foreign army would stop directly. They used extremely skilled techniques to quickly load the ammunition of their pistols. Franz did not see clearly what method these soldiers were using, and surprisingly, they loaded the ammunition of the pistols within 10 seconds. It felt like they simply and roughly stuffed a small bag mixed with bullets and gunpowder into the muzzle of the gun, without knowing what kind of black technology it was. Bang 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 bang. Another series of gunshots exploded like beans, and in the blink of an eye, dozens of robbers stood still and fell. This time, the army mainly aimed their targets at the enemy's crossbow soldiers, because for them, crossbow soldiers were the biggest threat. Although the accuracy of these handguns is not very good, hundreds of them fired directly at people's faces at such close distances, with a considerable hit rate. In the blink of an eye, the crossbow soldiers who stood up were almost wiped out, and many bandits who stood closer to them also suffered. The situation is not good, the wind is blowing hard. Seeing this terrible scene, all the robbers were scared out of their wits, and their leader had no intention of continuing the fight. He waved his hand and ordered his subordinates to run quickly. Anyway, these cavalry cannot go into the forest to pursue them. As long as they run into the forest, they will be safe. As for the commission given to him by the count this time, whoever likes to do it will do it. Anyway, he is ready to roll up the money and run away. That count is clearly deceiving these people, just for the sake of 100 gold coins, he lost so many brothers in one fell swoop. He has never done such a loss in his life by looking for the bandit leader at Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Franz was just about to order his cavalry to continue shooting, and at the same time, he drew his knight's sword from his waist. To his surprise, these bandits all scattered towards the forest without hesitation, and in the blink of an eye, they ran away completely. Some cavalry are still unwilling to shoot at them, but no one chooses to continue chasing them, because these young cavalry also know that if they enter the forest, they will only be directly trapped by the dense trees, and then they will be killed by these bandits. So it was also thanks to Franz's increased alertness after his strength was enhanced, and he ordered several young cavalry to go ahead and explore the way, so he did not encounter such a large number of casualties. Thinking of the scene of his cavalry being ambushed by these bandits from both sides if they were walking halfway, Franz immediately felt his cold sweat wet his clothes. Thanks to my own caution this time, otherwise I would have been ambushed by these pre-prepared bandits, and my light cavalry might have been completely destroyed in battle. After all, if these bandits charge up directly from both sides of the road with spears, they may not even have time to open fire and be directly stabbed to death by them. At that time, Franz can use his strong personal force to kill these bandits, or he can kill them all like an unparalleled warrior. However, looking at the chaos in front of him, Franz couldn't help but sneer in his heart. He knew that someone was definitely targeting him, otherwise these bandits would only be seeking wealth. Why would they suddenly attack his cavalry team like they have gone crazy? It's impossible that these bandits knew in advance about the power of firearms and wanted to snatch them from their own hands to sell them for money, right? Chapter 8. Economic Dilemmas. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Although Franz successfully defeated the bandits at almost no cost, he ultimately lost 5 cavalry. It was thanks to these 5 brave cavalry sacrificing themselves to explore the way and prevent the cavalry from making further sacrifices. The 3 fallen cavalry soldiers buried them directly on the spot and built a simple tomb for them. It seems that no matter where they are, people are accustomed to being safe in the ground. Although it is easier to burn the body directly with a torch, it makes the emotional aspect of soldiers somewhat unacceptable. The 2 injured cavalry soldiers were not very seriously injured, as they were protected by chest armor and were not hit by enemy fire. They were mostly injured in the arms and thighs. Although they didn't seem to have their heads pierced by crossbows like the 3 deceased companions, that didn't mean they were safe. Franz also had to prevent their wounds from developing tetanus. After all, these bandit arrows were not of high quality. Who knows how many times they had used these arrows? Franz doesn't have any particularly good disinfection methods on hand now, so he can only make these 2 unlucky wounded soldiers endure and order other soldiers to burn the small knife red with flames, and then directly press the red burned knife onto their wounds. This can be said to be the simplest and most brutal disinfection method, and the degree of pain is no different from a torture. However, this can at least ensure hemostasis and basic disinfection. In the absence of better conditions, high temperature can be said to be the most convenient disinfection method. Then Franz ordered the 2 unlucky cavalry to ride a carriage at the back of the team. After all, they were so injured that they couldn't ride horses anymore. Although there were no carriages in this cavalry team at the beginning, in order to rescue his wounded and wait for the opportunity to buy more supplies from other towns in the future to prevent accidental food shortages on the way, Franz chose to purchase 2 very ordinary flatbed carriages specifically for loading goods from the nearest market. As for grain and other sideline foods, Franz did not choose to purchase them from here. This place is relatively close to the Imperial capital, so prices are also relatively high. In addition, due to the famine outside a while ago, the grain merchants here were taking advantage of the opportunity to stir-fry the price of grain. Therefore, the price of grain here is now several times higher than the normal price. Even if Franz has money, he cannot buy grain from here unless he encounters some unavoidable circumstances. Along the way, Franz no longer continued to take small paths to save distance and time, but instead took the official roads built by the Empire many years ago. Although some places may not be very close in order to provide more avenues, this avenue is at least safer for people to come and go, and less likely to be ambushed by the enemy. Although Franz has successfully survived this wave of suicide, he cannot guarantee that he will only face this round of attacks. If the other party hires more people for insurance, he may still be in danger in the future. Unfortunately, if it weren't for the sake of avoiding suspicion, Franz had already recruited a group of Imperial knights directly for himself. If there were such a fully armed iron cannon, unless Franz's hidden enemies had the ability to mobilize local garrisons, it would be impossible to eliminate such a small knightly order. Even if placed on the most intense battlefield of the Empire, such a knightly order is still the main force. With suitable terrain, it can easily defeat thousands of enemy soldiers, which is definitely not something that a group of petty thieves have the ability to deal with. However, Franz couldn't explain to others why he had such a cavalry unit, because mercenaries couldn't have knights, and he shouldn't have such a cavalry unit. If he had a unit that was completely incompatible with his own strength, it was inevitable that those idle nobles and emperors would think of something useless. However, Franz finally understood now that raising an army was truly a huge expense. Even though these cavalry soldiers did not need to pay their own wages, their various expenses of eating horses and chewing were still a considerable expense. Along the way, Franz had already regretted recharging all the money he had on hand. Now, the money he had to pay for these cavalry expenses was only some change he had seized from the bandits after eliminating them before. Together, this money was not even as high as Franz's quarterly income as a royal knight. The various pieces of change added together are enough to make a small bag, but they are just some very worthless copper coins or small silver coins with low silver content. In the end, the value of gold coins should not exceed more than 10 gold coins. As a royal knight, Franz's annual income is still a safe 50 gold coins, even if it is not considered as a bribe given by someone at times. This money is probably enough for me to spend 2 days eating, drinking, and finding a place to stay under these subordinates. Fortunately, these cavalry soldiers brought their own supplies when they appeared, otherwise Franz would have gone bankrupt on the spot. So who said the gold belt for murder and arson? Franz felt like he had seized a wave of spoils of war and didn't make much money in the end. Although this money was indeed not a small amount compared to his previous income as a royal knight, considering that he had brought a total of 60 cavalry, this money could only be considered a drop in the bucket. Even inviting everyone to open up and have a drink in the tavern was not enough. But there is no other way, after all, whose family's bandits are like the legendary Ali Baba and the 40 thieves, saving all the money they have stolen into a treasure trove for collection. The reason why they become robbers is originally aimed at living a life where they can eat meat and drink alcohol in large bowls, so they come and spend money quickly, and cannot save any money with them. If it weren't for the fear of being besieged on weekdays, they would have to hide in the deep mountains and forests. If they wanted to go down the mountain to consume and shop, they would have to take turns to go down and have a free-spirited lifestyle. I'm afraid they wouldn't even be able to save their little change. Thinking of this, Franz also regretted not rushing forward and leaving their leader behind. After all, bandit groups like this usually have the leader take the majority of their wealth, and the rest belongs to their subordinates. Perhaps the wealth owned by the bandit leader alone can be equivalent to nearly half of the total wealth of all his subordinates combined. Except for financial constraints, everything else along the way could only be considered peaceful, but Franz and his cavalry were not in high spirits. In the absence of money, they can only choose to camp in the wilderness. Although it is not impossible for these veterans to make do with setting up tents outside, they definitely do not sleep comfortably inside the house. In addition, they cannot engage in any additional entertainment consumption besides the most basic daily food consumption, because the prices of these entertainment consumption are too expensive, and the price of a glass of wine is enough to eat a good meal for themselves. After all the alcohol these days is truly brewed from grains, without so much technology and ruthlessness. In addition, there has been a food crisis in recent days, so the prices of various alcoholic beverages are naturally high. At this point, Franz understood why many knights were willing to give up their honor and choose to go out and rob their homes, because their expenses were really high, but there was no good way to make money. A knight will definitely not be willing to treat himself unfairly, so not to mention eating meat and drinking alcohol in large bowls every day, but at least he will not eat dry and hard black bread like those old farmers all day. Therefore, they will definitely eat something good outside, and it is impossible for them to just find a pile of straw to sleep in when wandering outside for accommodation. At least they need to find a better condition hotel and also call a waitress to relax, so the expenses will suddenly come up. But these knights can only obtain spoils of war while fighting outside, or they either hold a meager tax on their fiefdoms. In fact, most knights do not have fiefdoms at all, they are just a group of aristocratic collateral children who have been expelled from their homes. In this case, they have no stable source of income. In the end, some knights who spend money recklessly but cannot make money can only choose to rob. Anyway, they also have weapons and martial arts skills, just like those rangers in the past, becoming one of the unstable factors in society. Franz even felt that he was about to have the desire to rob in the end. Although he didn't have the intention of robbing those poor people, he had the idea of attacking a bandit stronghold and taking his cavalry with him. Just before Franz could carry out his adventure plan, he suddenly gained an unexpected fortune. When Franz had already reached the border area of the Aragon province, he suddenly met a group of bandits who were besieging a caravan. More and more farmers are unable to survive these days. Naturally, they don't want to starve to death and can only find a new way out. Some people choose to directly raise the banner and rebel, but some people don't have such great ambitions and abilities. They just go with the flow, so they choose to find a foothold to become bandits. As a result, the number of bandits within the empire has sharply increased. Although Franz had no acquaintance with this besieged caravan, due to the presence of noble family emblems within the caravan, Franz, who is now considered a noble in the Aragon province, naturally would not allow the already impoverished bandits to act recklessly. Without hesitation, Franz led the cavalry behind him to charge forward and easily defeated these bandits. After all, with preparation and suitable terrain conditions, the cavalry was like an unstoppable bulldozer, not something that a group of poorly organized and lacking equipment bandits could stop. After rescuing this caravan, Franz unexpectedly learned that it was led by the third young master of the Viscount Cox family and was still carrying a batch of important goods that seemed to be some kind of textile. Franz knew the taboos of these caravans and went to the book garden www.zhaoshuyuan.com, so he didn't inquire about what goods they actually had. After helping them out, Franz hinted that he should be given some compensation. When the other party heard that Franz was actually a newly conferred baron in the border area, who was also a nobleman with territory, they immediately changed their attitude. Not only did they offer Franz 100 gold coins as a reward for his brave performance, but they also approached Franz in various ways. Just when Franz thought that according to the usual routine in various novels, they would recommend their family sisters to him next and prepare to marry him, a new noble, Franz realized that he had thought too much. The reason why the Covens family is so passionate about Franz is partly because Franz is also considered a brand new feudal aristocrat, and belongs to almost natural allies and companions with their family. On the other hand, it is because this third young master is very interested in the pistol that Franz has in his cavalry equipment, and wants to purchase some pistols from Franz's hands and purchase the manufacturing method of this pistol. Franz ultimately refused this request because he now places great importance on gunpowder, a weapon that can change the situation of war, and does not want anything related to it to flow out of his hands. Therefore, it is impossible to purchase a handgun from himself. Discovering that his behavior may have been a bit presumptuous, the third young master of the Covens family quickly apologized to Franz and then never mentioned the issue of the handgun. However, Franz also felt that he couldn't find out the secret about the handgun from his own hands, and his treatment of himself was not that high. So Franz didn't lead his cavalry to stay here much, just parted ways with them and continued to rush towards his fiefdom. Chapter 9. Difficulty in reaching the territory. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Although Franz received a generous bonus for his bravery on the road, his economic difficulties did not fundamentally change. It can only be said that this fund can temporarily alleviate his urgent needs and prevent him from falling into a situation of looting. But now that he has arrived in the Aragon province, it means that Franz is about to reach his fiefdom, where he can arrange accommodation for these cavalry. He also has farmland within his territory to produce food and other agricultural products, and the food problem that troubles him can be solved. Although Franz was not sure if his fiefdom could afford to support such 60 cavalry, he felt that he could still barely afford it. If he couldn't, he would find ways to continue making money and import food and other supplies from outside. Anyway, as a modern time traveler, Franz has plenty of money-making ideas in his mind, so he is not very worried about the construction of his territory. Or rather, Franz never worried about his ability to make money, he only worried about his ability to protect it. But looking back at the cavalry behind him, and then closing his eyes to look at the total war interface that was stuck in his mind, Franz felt that he would never fall behind in terms of strength in the future. Originally, Franz thought he would soon reach his fiefdom, but the fact proved that he had overthinked it. Although in terms of straight line distance, Franz is now close to his fiefdom, but he has overlooked the question of whether this path is easy to take. If viewed from a straight line distance, Franz had already traveled 80% of the distance, but he overlooked that the roads he had previously traveled included official roads built by the Empire and various other roads. However, when he arrived at the Aragon province, he found that it was filled with mountainous areas, and the mountain roads were even more difficult to walk than he had imagined. Although this place has not yet reached the level of difficulty in the legendary Shoe Road, it has greatly slowed down Franz's movement speed. Especially in these border areas, they were not valued by the Empire at all, and were not even developed much. There were no official highways built by the Empire, only various small roads opened up by local residents. In addition, they needed to climb back and forth on one mountain after another, which brought a lot of inconvenience to Franz's journey. Thanks to all the agile light cavalry summoned by Franz, they have a relatively strong adaptability to the terrain, so they cannot walk on some difficult roads at all. Otherwise, if it were Imperial knights with heavy armor and both men and horses walking on such roads, it would really save lives. And most importantly, the journey was not particularly peaceful. Although Franz was not attacked by any bandits, he always noticed that there were people quietly watching him from behind his team. As the saying goes, in economically underdeveloped mountainous areas, it is normal for the local residents to have strong customs. Many villages in the area are actually gangs of robbers, and when no one passes by on weekdays, they are honest in farming around. However, once someone passes by, they immediately transform into professional robbers. There is no way to govern such a village at all. After all, they are already in a very remote location, and the army cannot come here. They can often hide in the mountains and forests, so there is no good way to deal with them. There is more than one village like this, and even some villages have existed for over 100 years. The entire village has relied on buying and selling without a capital for generations to make a living. Elaine felt like she was also a dog in the sun. It's just such a ghost place, no wonder no nobleman wants his fiefdom to be sealed here. If he had the choice, he wouldn't be willing to choose to live in such a place. After all, it's really no different from exile. Think about it, it's like you were originally a high-paying white-collar worker in a big city, working in a job that, although not so promising, still pays a lot of money every month. One day, you suddenly ate hot pot and sang a song, and then you were forcibly ordered by some people to go to the mountain village for teaching support, and still threw you over under the guise of dedicating to the motherland. Your mood can only be imagined. Although Franz came to this place to be a lord, which is what people call the local emperor, not to support education in this mountain village, considering his income and working conditions as a royal knight and considering the tax revenue of these ground beetle lords in this place for a year, as well as the conditions under their rule, Franz felt that there was not much difference between himself and those who support education in the mountain village. The first thing to do here was to find a way to make people rich, or else his tax revenue could not be settled. Don't think that going out to become a feudal aristocrat is truly becoming a local emperor. Although these feudal aristocrats don't need to return to the capital every year to meet the emperor, they need to pay taxes directly to the emperor every year. And each knight's tax will be calculated in a very complex way based on their territory. If you cannot pay the tax for 3 consecutive years, your title is likely to be deprived by the emperor again. Although there are many nobles in the empire who can enjoy various tax exemptions or preferential policies, the nobles here are basically powerful families, and ground beetle like the frontier nobles in Aragon province must not be included in the welfare. After walking an unknown number of miles on the mountain road, Franz had been comparing the map in his hand and hiring several guides from the people around him. Most of these guides are relatively reliable, after all. Facing Franz's fully armed cavalry, not everyone has such good psychological qualities to dare to randomly guide the way. But Franz also encountered an unreliable guide who deliberately pointed Franz the wrong way and led these cavalry into a small valley, then ambushed Franz's troops with a group of mostly lawless villagers. But they made a mistake, which was that these people thought Franz's cavalry was just a group of units that could only engage in close combat, so they could stand tall and have no fighting power against these cavalry. But they didn't expect these pistol cavalry to be able to directly draw out their guns and shoot indiscriminately. A group of mountain people who were busy laughing on the small hill were suddenly shot and turned into a hornet's nest. These cavalry also took advantage of the other party's panic and quickly left this place of trouble, then chased them directly from another road. Although Franz ultimately failed to catch up with these despicable little thieves, at least he gave them a bloody lesson and successfully eliminated dozens of them. What only left Franz extremely dissatisfied was that these guys were all a group of poor people, even poorer than the bandits he had encountered before. After searching their bodies for half a day, he didn't even find any currency. Later, Franz found out that these very closed mountain villages had almost no contact with the rest of the empire, which led to their lives being very closed. In a small society like the village, there was no need for a complex currency system, and they could simply use the most primitive barter. After playing a game, there was actually no game, which also made Franz feel extremely unhappy, but it was also an unavoidable thing. Franz now finally understood how annoying these troublemakers were. They would run out and do whatever they wanted, take advantage of any gains they had. When they found out the situation was not right, they would immediately burrow into the deep mountains and forests, then hide without a trace, and wait until the storm had passed before running out to live again. Franz also couldn't let his cavalry go deep into the jungle to pursue the enemy. After all, the soldiers of the empire were not good at jungle warfare, and would instead expose their weaknesses to the enemy. Ignoring the troublemakers in these mountain villages, Franz walked the mountain road for 20 days before finally leading his seemingly destitute cavalry to his own fiefdom. The town of Holland. When Franz and his large cavalry had just arrived here, the sentry standing on the watchtower next to the town wall suddenly saw this sudden cavalry team and immediately rang the alarm without hesitation. In no time, a group of militiamen carrying various weapons ran out, looking nervously at the cavalry appearing outside, as if watching a group of fierce beasts. Franz was also somewhat surprised by the performance of these townspeople. He had no idea that he had finally arrived at his territory, and that his lords would welcome him so much. In order to avoid any misunderstandings, Franz had already had his cavalry display the blue flag of the Rhine Empire sword and rose, as well as the red and white cross skull he had designed for himself, which was almost identical to the flag of the Sigma Empire in Warhammer World. In theory, if it were placed in the Imperial capital and found at Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, the local residents would immediately recognize such a flag as the military emblem of a certain lord. However, in such a remote place, these people seemed to have not recognized their own army. There was no other way. Franz could only lead his cavalry team to form a line of troops and approach step by step, then order one of his cavalry to run over and think of the people in the town shouting loudly, "Open the door quickly, Holland leads the new lord, Karl Joseph Franz is here." Upon hearing such a voice, these townspeople immediately wavered and seemed less alert than before. After a short while, a person wearing a set of lock armor and a long sword on his waist walked over with a small step and quickly walked up to Karl Franz, saying, "I'm sorry, sir. I need to confirm your noble identity." Upon hearing these words, Franz frowned slightly. He didn't believe that people who were not usually aristocrats had the ability to bring such a team over. But he didn't say anything. Instead he took out his viscount, and as for the fact that his coronation document was still kept by him personally. After all, this kind of metal is actually not worth money. As long as it is lost, it can be easily reissued in the imperial capital. However, if the coronation document is lost, it will be a big problem. It is like an ancient person losing the emperor's decree or their official seal, which can be said to be a serious crime. After carefully examining the metal, the person's attitude immediately improved and he knelt down on one knee towards Franz, saying, "I'm sorry, sir. Our Lord Holland was just attacked earlier, and we are all a bit nervous now. Welcome, I am Dennis Court, the Sheriff of Holland Town. From today on, I will be your most loyal servant." Chapter 10. Strict Tax System. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Not encountering the so-called forced face scene in the novel made Franz couldn't help but curl his lips. Judging from the previous posture, Franz thought they were not prepared to admit their lord. However, for the sheriff in front of him who knelt down on one knee and swore allegiance to himself, Franz wouldn't really be foolish to think that this guy would directly prepare to pledge allegiance to him from the bottom of his heart after seeing him. Although Franz is not quite sure if there are legendary characters in this world who can attract heroes from all over the world with their personal charm, making others have an impulse to bow down when they see them, Franz is well aware that he is definitely not such a legendary figure. To put it bluntly, if it weren't for Franz having a total war system as his golden finger, he wouldn't be anything at all now. He couldn't have the ambition to overthrow the empire as he had before. At most he could have used all the modern knowledge and some specious management methods he possessed as a traveler to honestly find a piece of land to farm and spend his life. Franz is not quite sure why those who are now just ordinary people, but after crossing over, can suddenly become the legendary chaotic heroes, transforming from the original otaku to the action faction, recruiting troops and horses, and then participating in the epic struggle for lords. Anyway, he is still very clear about his abilities. To put it bluntly, let alone letting him manage a country or territory, he himself doesn't even understand how to be the class monitor. If he had such management talent, he would have already made a name for himself in modern society. Where would he need to cross over? Franz's current positioning is that he is an iron waste who relies solely on his golden finger for development. If he didn't have his golden finger, he would at most be able to farm steadily and honestly here, and he could hardly do anything else and could only go with the flow. After all, having knowledge and skills in your mind doesn't mean you can manage others well. Managing this kind of thing is not something you can learn, let alone having some advanced management knowledge can make you a successful manager. This is like how none of the so-called masters of success studies are truly successful individuals, and learning success studies cannot truly lead to success. Franz brought his army into the city, or rather, he entered this relatively large village. As he walked, he asked the sheriff next to him about some basic information about the territory, and at the same time, he also tried to test the sheriff around him to see if he was really a bit skilled or just a rascal. There are too many grassroots officials within the empire these days. After all, most people become officials not based on their own abilities, but on their background. The reason why many security officers in different regions can become security officers is not because they have many governance abilities, but because they are the brother-in-law of a local lord. There is a magical system of security officers within the bureaucratic system of the empire. Sometimes, there are areas without lords, and the empire temporarily appoints a village chief or leader elected by the locals to serve as a security officer, assisting the empire in managing various local affairs and imposing taxes on the area. Sometimes there are local lords who rule, but the lords themselves are not good at management, or if the lords do not have the heart to manage their own territory, they can also appoint someone to serve as their own security officer to help them manage their territory, and then busy themselves with other things. This kind of security officer gives a feeling similar to that of professional managers in some enterprises. As the true owner of the land, aristocratic lords are like the chairman or board members of the enterprise, but they may not know how to manage their own business. Therefore, they need some personnel who are better at management to help them manage their own industry, such as housekeepers or such security officers. The Sheriff Dennis Scott around Franz was chosen by the locals themselves because there were no lords here and the empire wanted to maintain local governance and taxation. He was originally just a local businessman. However, this merchant did not give Franz the feeling of being as cunning and slick as those merchants in the imperial capital, but rather had a sense of swift and decisive behavior. After Franz's inquiry, he was certain that the person in front of him, although not considered a rare talent, could also be considered a qualified sheriff. He had a very clear understanding of the local land, taxation, and population, and could also explain some of the conflicts that the locals had. I just don't know if this guy has embezzled taxes or something. Franz knew that the position of a sheriff who could replace the empire in taxing his own jurisdiction was a very lucrative one. For example, the empire had clearly issued a tax rate of 10-1, but if the sheriff himself privately said that the empire suddenly increased taxes and had no channels to inquire about the legal provisions, these farmers would not be able to truly oppose the sheriff. At most, they would only complain a few words. As long as no one gets in the hands of the sheriff, he can almost do whatever he wants in this regard. So Franz is also very clear in his heart that most sheriffs are not willing to hand over their power to these feudal lords, and the family in front of him may have the same idea. Anyway, at least he concealed his inner thoughts very well. From his current performance, he has always been very diligent and responsible, like a qualified butler, introducing various industries on his territory to his noble grandfather. Franz learned that the annual tax revenue of this town can be equivalent to about 80 gold coins, but only half of these 80 gold coins come from agricultural taxes, and the remaining 40 gold coins come from various channels. For example, if there is a newborn on the territory, it is necessary to pay a new head tax. Young men and women on the territory also need to pay marriage tax after getting married. After the elderly die and want to be buried in the soil, they also need to pay a funeral tax. It can be said that there are all kinds of exorbitant taxes and levies. In addition, some of the gold coins originated from the use of the mill. In this era, most lords strictly controlled the mill, because people would not directly take their wheat to cook congee if they wanted to eat it. They would often mill the wheat into flour and then make various kinds of bread, so as long as they controlled the mill, villagers would have to pay a fee to the lord when using the mill. Although the usage fee may not be very high, everyone needs to grind wheat, so in the accumulation of small amounts, the usage fee of the mill has become a considerable income. Interestingly, Franz realized how miserable the life of ordinary farmers in this era was. Leaving agricultural tax aside, no feudal dynasty could exempt itself from agricultural tax, which is fundamental to a country. Moreover, there are too many things involved in the agricultural tax, which are strictly regulated by imperial laws. Even as a lord, one cannot casually change the issue of agricultural tax, otherwise it would be like treason. But for those other exorbitant taxes and levies, Franz, who used to live in modern society, felt that it was really unnecessary. This was purely a group of local lords setting up a chaotic tax system to extract as much money as possible from their own people. Simply put, it was just a clever name. The cost of having a newborn is simply a scam, which is clearly forcing people to reduce their fertility rate. The population is an important dividend in these years. Although it cannot be said that more people are better, if people no longer love having children at this time, then this society can be said to be directly hopeless. After all, the infant mortality rate is already very high in these years, and there is a great need for young labor, without corresponding pension benefits. If there were a population aging problem at this time, there would be no way for society to solve it, only to starve the elderly, let more land be abandoned, and cause the population of the empire to sharply decline. As for the marriage tax that young men and women need to pay when getting married, it originates from another deceitful tradition. Find Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com because in the past, lords in these places were able to enjoy the right of first night, which means that women and virgins in their own territory must be handed over to their lords. But many local lords found that they didn't have the physical strength to play with the virgins on the land all day long, and most of the rural women were not good looking at all, with calluses on their hands. The year-round work also made their figures dark, thin, and hunchbacked. Even many people had problems such as not having many opportunities to take a shower and having a bad odor, so in fact, few local lords had the high interest to play with their rural women all day long. So some lords pushed the boat along with the flow, and in order to dig more money out of the hands of the lords, they enacted the marriage tax, which was a pitying tax law. To put it simply, this marriage tax is actually for the groom to redeem the bride's first night rights from the lord's hands. If he doesn't want to marry a second-hand wife that the lord has played with, the groom can only spend money to redeem someone from his own lord's hands, and then the marriage tax is born, which makes Franz feel extremely embarrassed. Undoubtedly, both the head tax and marriage tax on newborns must be abolished, which is clearly persecuting the fertility rate in one's own territory and can seriously lead to dissatisfaction among the people in one's own territory. Moreover, Franz felt that he still had basic moral principles. How could he possibly, like those bandits, demand that the groom redeem his bride from his own hands? Isn't this a forced kidnapping? In addition, the funeral tax was also a tax that gave Franz a headache, but it was really difficult to handle on its own because only half of the tax belonged to itself, and the other half belonged to local church organizations. Regardless of the era, any issues related to governance involving religious organizations will become very troublesome.